Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to the CAF News. My name is Kevin Donovan, and I am here as usual with my partner, Bryce. Bryce, how are you doing?
Doing really good this morning, Kevin. We have an interesting topic today.
Yeah, we do. It piggybacks on this move from co-pilots to co-workers, kind of the agent workforce. And especially focusing on Palantir, an article that you raised up, that they may have created resurrected an important role in tech right now. It's been copied. People have failed at copying it. But it's not exactly a new engineer. It's not the rise of the AI engineer necessarily. It's more kind of about rebuilding how technology actually gets work done and then how that feeds back at times to the mothership. So the move from co-pilots to co-workers and co-collaboration, co-creation.
Yeah, exactly. And this really follows on the heels of Palantir, which is really trying to revisit the role, which has been called a forward deployed engineer, sometimes a similar role as a forward deployed architect. It's been, common in a lot of organizations. In Microsoft, we had a role called the Information Technology Architecture Planning Advisor, the ITAP.
Yeah, you were one of them, right?
I was one of them for about 7 years. And, it was the idea of how do clients that want to get the goodness in the mother company get that goodness. And they would deploy us on site to work. The original intention, I think, was very good, to work with the client, to understand what they needed to do. And before we came on board, I think we talked about a few things. And I think, when we look at framing this conversation, I think there's at least a few elements that we want to cover today. The first is the customers often don't understand what they need. And so I think a role like this is essential in being able to do that. In fact, we've even seen companies now that have tried to do it rather than being tied into a single vendor. Just generally, like there's companies like Platypus that say, here's a forward deployed engineer. Let's bring them on board and let's manage that regardless of who you are, to get somebody to work with and support the vendor in the client site. The second issue that came up with these roles, which I think is a very good criticism, is they get mislabeled and they can degenerate into a sales engineer role, which I don't know many clients. I mean, maybe there's a few that I don't think they want a guy on their staff selling them stuff and then paying for that. So it's a line between the two of them and keeping the client's interest at heart. And the third thing that I think is interesting that we might want to touch on, it is a role that, maybe there's an agentic component to this one that we're looking at. Maybe I need an advisor. Maybe I don't need a human advisor. I have a colleague and I've uploaded his GPT. It's like, oh, okay, now I've got a digital architecture friend that I can ask what he would do based on that, colleague's writings and everything that it absorbed into the learning model. So maybe let's start with the challenge that customers face. What they're looking at with a forward deployed engineer, how they come at it. And I think, Kevin, one thing that you raised early in our discussion is there's also a mindset shift in trying to find what you need to do and where you need to. And we talked about it in several contexts, and maybe I can get you to elaborate on this idea of shifting from process thinking to capability thinking in terms of business need. And, I think we talked about two parts to that, like with innovation. What capabilities do I need? How does that relate to my business model? Versus how do I expand out a capability, recognizing that, capabilities are far more static. They're more salient than processes, right? Like you go to 7-Eleven, they're always going to have a capability, take money, and different ways of doing it. So how do we make that shift? Do you think the forward deployed engineer is someone that can help with that, Kevin?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I mean, obviously Palantir is not inventing a role here, but they may have uncovered a gap, and especially in AI development, as you say, I think it's great that they sit directly with the business and they are working on real operational problems. Um, they get their fingers dirty in the platforms, data workflows, all in real time. So you can understand that there's demand there. Um, but yeah, I think that it's more than kind of, a hybrid engineer or a full stack unicorn. I think it's a little bit more of kind of an execution model shift. Uh, you know, these systems, and it may change the architectural approach, but a lot of these systems are continuously adapted in production. And in the case of Palantir, those adaptations, if generally applicable or abstractable, get fed back into whatever, I guess Foundry is one of these, the business facing Palantir products. But you have engineers directly embedded in these decision loops, and these are not system of record kind of systems. They don't just store data; they execute outcomes.
You,
So
you
yeah,
brought up a good point here with the Foundry too. Like when Palantir was getting started, and I was surprised to learn that when they in the early days they were maybe founded as a CIA based venture company, and they had these forward deployed engineers, and these forward deployed engineers also played a significant role in coordinating and going, I think, right back to product teams. So Foundry, from what I understand, was built on a lot of the input of these forward deployed engineers. And it's funny because I think this is key, is having access to the product group is essential. When we had the ITAP role at Microsoft, being able to reach back into the product groups and help the customer understand what the product really did in terms of their business need. And I think those two components were essential. What are you doing with your business? And to me, that goes beyond, it's really there seems to be almost an evangelist role, Kevin, where you go beyond just telling the client, here's a product, but where you actually link it into their business need in a traceable way. How do you do that? And we were talking about capability. You got to sort of move beyond process thinking to capability thinking. And that's a tough shift, right? For a lot of people, clients.
It can be, it's a layer of abstraction, which is our only tool. But that comes at a cost. Some people will not follow you, especially, people who have mapped out all, 172 of their processes in great detail don't really want to hear that you're bringing something that rips those apart unless they can really understand. But yeah, very relevant in terms of agentic orchestration, especially because then each of these steps in the process become skills or an agent. And you should be able to use the same agent that does this kind of work in this workflow here in another workflow that's exactly the same kind of work, or parameterized slightly different. And so if you can abstract that up to this is what we do. Yes, there's a way we do, there's a how today, but that's process and that's technology, and that is exactly what's going to change. The how we do it.
Kevin, why is process a bad way to look at it? And I've had clients that have bought into, process APQC frameworks and things like this.
Yeah.
And this is what they're doing. And at a high level, what I found is it was very hard to get their heads around things for reusability. And we talked about composability as obstacles. And why is that such a difficult conversation, do you think?
Well, I wouldn't lay out by saying that processes are bad or a bad way to look at them. I love when I come into an organization and they have well-defined processes. That's great. That is a stepping stone. But you need to be able to show the difference between processes and capabilities and why the difference matters. It allows a focus In large organizations, you can have geographically separated, ergo siloed business departments, but everyone does customs declaration. We do it in the beginning because we're import. Oh, great. We do it at the end because we're export and we're this and we're that. But if instead of optimizing for their usage in import and their usage in export and their usage here and there, if we just looked at it as great, customs declaration is a capability. It's a thing we need to do and do well, and put one person or a little committee from all of this, all these different areas together to look at how do we optimize the way that we do this, the capability, then you wouldn't be making suboptimal siloed decisions about the important things that your business does. You'd have a clear view, and that's what you get by lifting it up by that one layer. And then, of course, once you do that, do the portfolio rationalization. I'm sure there was 17 customs declaration applications that people are using. Let's get that down to 4 or 5. But then you can also start looking at kind of like a time, do we want to invest in this? Is it differentiating for us? Are we looking to eliminate this because it's, end of life next year or the following? And that way, if you have this for all of your capabilities, you can start building in capability-based planning so that resources and funding go to projects that are critical for differentiating capabilities instead of whoever yells the loudest, which, happens a lot.
Yeah, and going back to and relating this a little bit to the forward deployed role, I think what happens is there's a lot of pressure on that role from the vendor to make sales. And in fact, I think the role can change. It's a very fine line to me to doing what the customer needs to delivering, I'm going to increase my sales. So you can have I'm going to put out, it's very easy to have a client conversation as a vendor about process and to look at where a product fits into a process or how you could support the process, what you're trying to do. And you can come up with very immediate things that you might be able to do that may be somewhat helpful, but are sort of the enemy to a really good outcome, versus a capability-based approach where the capabilities clearly also trace to business model changes. So they're really about talking to your C-suite, they're talking to the executive level, and how do we actually do things strategically. And I think if you're going to do those business changes, you're going to get huge wins. Like there's a huge strategic component, value component that you can capture. The process mindset can miss that, I think, is one of the fundamental problems. And I think when you do miss that, and with these forward deployed roles, one of the problems is, you start to get a sales mindset. And I think you also get from the vendor a lot of sales pressure at some point. Oh, you're on the client site. Now you need to sell versus taking the time to build something out. So at Microsoft, for instance, we had this ITAP role, and the holy grail, I think, of that role was to be able to come in and look at what was the client's strategy, what could we achieve with them. And I think but at the same time, there was a real danger and a real push to deliver results and sell products. And I mean, I think that can deteriorate. I mean, there was changes, and I think the role swung more to the sales side, and I think clients, and I think this is the negative criticism around the forward deployed role. And I think what Palantir is trying to do to make it work is focus more on that. What can we do? And the other point is, when you have a process mindset, do you even know what to do? Like, does the client even have a good way of looking at it? Or do they get locked into process thinking? And you miss the idea of changing capabilities, right? And you don't see what to do.
Yeah. The chain linearity of the process view can give you tunnel vision. That can be constricting. And I can certainly see how sales and marketing sees an FDE as the foot in the door, boots on the ground, give us the intel and start selling. And that would be an unfortunate way to fail. But the question around processing capabilities kind of raises almost a broader question in my head. If I could like play devil's advocate, you know, traditionally architecture, enterprise architecture will kind of be looking to build this separation of concerns and stable contracts interfaces, maybe slower change cycles. I don't know. But you know, the FDE model seems to describe this hands-on continuous reconfiguration, tight coupling and understanding to the business context, very real-time execution loops. Is architecture collapsing into ops at that point?
Great question. And as we need to move quicker, there's a pressure to do the right thing with less time. How do you deliver that in a way that makes sense, right? And so,
Yeah.
and ultimately, I think the other question now is there a point where you go beyond the idea of a human FDE and you bring in agents, right? I mean,
Yeah.
how far away is that to getting an agent that I can talk to that knows about my company?
Sure. Oh yeah, sure. Right. Yeah, as soon as people's architectures are agent ready, then what FDEs do today manually, agents will do tomorrow.
And what they do is really come to now the other side to this is if I'm a client and I'm working with an agent or maybe a far out FDE and they start coming up with these ideas and I want to be like a Palantir. Great. And now we start talking about how do we bring in an ontology at your data layer? Oh, that's a new term. I don't feel comfortable. How do we deal
don't
with
say ontology.
Yeah, like people are uncomfortable with these new ideas, right? And wow, I'm just a process company. So to there's going to be a real sense of getting over the hump. I would say it's almost like jumping off the cliff with a bit of faith. But then at the other hand, how do I separate that with agents versus hallucinations? So I think you still need somebody at least for a while, we'll still need people in that role. What do you think, Kevin?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think there is a shift here. Systems of record to systems of execution. Uh, you know, engineers maybe configure platforms, but then agents drive outcomes. You know, Palantir has their eye on it, obviously. The rest of the market may be having similar thoughts. You know, and are we building a system that needs more humans or one that can operate without them? You know, it's a good question. Time will tell.
Time will tell. And even with the role, will Palantir succeed in reinventing it? Or is this a progression that companies go through when they're young and nimble? They understand the role. They want to genuinely work with clients to do the right thing as clients try to emulate them. But, are they going to have enough latitude to maybe advise on things that may not be Palantir? Like, oh, here's another product that's a better fit. So this was one of the things as an ITAP advisor we were allowed to do with Microsoft is recommend other products that were non-Microsoft. Now,
nice.
That's nice, but I can also say that if you did that and you better be sure that Microsoft didn't have that capability first, right? And I mean, that's true with any vendor, right? Like I don't think that's a controversial statement. It sounds that way.
No.
But it's how do I present that client with the best information? I think for that forward deployed role to work, you need that freedom to build out. I think this is what we're talking about, to go from the business to understand what the business truly needs, and then look at what they can do as in the realm of real possibilities. And that also means that there's going to be some growth that's happening. And the growth has those uncomfortable conversations. It requires excellent communication. Forget the technology. I think these architects are going to need to have excellent communication skills and be able to relate, C-suite to customer, connect the picture together to vendor product groups.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it could easily fall prey to the economics of greed if not done well.
Yes.
Yeah, we'll see.
Great discussion today, Kevin. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing it back. It was nice talking. Great. Well, everyone, thank you very much. We will see you next time. Be sure to, add any comments, thoughts, and we will see you again next week.
Thanks, everyone. Great talking to you. We did have more comments are coming out, and I want to really thank everybody who did comment and participate in those discussions. And also let us know if you'd like to see a live CAF news recording where you can participate in the discussion.
That's right.
Yeah, that'd be exciting. Thanks, everyone. Cheers.
Okay. See ya.